Hello and welcome everyone. This is Charles-Emmanuel Côté, kinesiologist here at the Cardiac Rehabilitation Center at Richardson Hospital, here to talk to you about managing cardiovascular risk in today's capsule. So we're going to discuss a bit what the risk factors are for cardiovascular disease and the solution we have to counter those risk factors. All right, so I'm speaking about risk factors. Let's define first what is a risk factor. All right, so a risk factor is a biological marker or a behavior that's been known to increase the risk of developing a disease. So the more risk factor you have, the bigger your chances of getting the disease or getting complication from the disease years. Here, of course, we talk about cardiovascular disease, which is a progressive disease with the accumulation of plaque within the arteries that over time can eventually clog and cause a heart attack. All right, so the factors that we're going to see today have an impact at some point down the line in accelerating this plaque accumulation process. All right, so there is two categories of risk factor. There is some that we can modify and some that we can't. All right, let's clear first those that we don't really have any control over. So the non-modifiable ones. So ages and sex is the first thing. So generally speaking, men are at more risk than women, or at least their risk for cardiovascular disease starts younger. All right, as a general rule, the older you are, the bigger your risk. But for men, the risk really starts to increase once we're past 45-year-old. While in women, you have those famous hormones, sexual hormone of yours that are actually protective for your cardiovascular system. So the risk only starts to increase a bit older in women, more around 55-year-old or more, or after you've been menopause, because you lose that protection from the hormone at that moment. Two other factors here are a bit more related to genetics. So your family history. So if you have a direct relation, so we speak about either your dad, your mother, brother, or sister who did have a heart event at young age, and you can see here the definition of what young age is, then you are also at risk of having a higher risk of cardiovascular disease because it's kind of written in your genes. If it happened to somebody that close to you, you are also sharing a part of that risk on your own too. Same thing about ethnic group or ethnicity. So unfortunately, people of African or Asian origin are usually at a higher risk for cardiovascular disease. That's a bit more written in your genes. So there's not much we can do about it. You're starting with a bit of a lesser deck of cards, let's say, but you can still play them right. Let's see how we can play our cards right on more of the modifiable risk factors, those that you can change. So the first two here are a bit more related to exercise. So there's kind of two things that we look for exercise. Do you move on a daily, and what type of performance are you able to do? So being sedentary, not moving enough, sitting too much, being some kind of couch potato like we have on the picture here is a risk factor for cardiovascular disease. So sedentary behavior here is defined as less than 3 times 30 minutes per week of exercise. So it's a combination of a lot of sitting time and not much activity. All right. On the other side of thing, the performance of the engine, the heart, which is the pump at the center of the mechanism of exercise, the more you are able to perform at high intensity, the better the health of your heart is generally. All right, if you're able to make a nice workload output with your heart, that usually means that the functioning is efficient. While on the contrary, if you're struggling with daily activities and you get short of breath and your exercise capacity is low, well, it is a higher risk for cardiovascular disease, all right? Because that's a sign that your heart is a bit less fit, thus a bit more at risk for cardiovascular disease. We have here in bold what we can do with our lifestyle to change or manage those risks. So of course, to fight sedentary, well, it's to reduce sitting time and try to stand up more often. So to be a bit more active in our daily activities and also to increase our capacity, having really exercise or physical activity dedicated to improve our fitness is a good thing to do. And that's what we try to do in the program here with you too. Let's see now. The next modifiable risk factor is a bit more about how you treat your mouth and what you put into there. All right, so unhealthy eating is a risk factor for cardiovascular disease, but it can show up in different kind of ways. Nutrition is a bit a multi-layer complex issue, but things like eating too much, having too much sugar, or a lot of sugar drinks in your nutrition, eating a lot of rich or transformed food, or not eating much fruit and vegetable are usually known to increase the risk for cardiovascular disease. Same thing with alcohol. It's quite a myth that even a moderate dose of alcohol can be good for health. There's not really an acceptable amount of alcohol that's good for health. All right, so moderation is recommended, but also if you want to lower the risk at its minimum, trying to restrain yourself as much as possible from alcohol is the best suggestion that we can give for your heart. All right. So what can we do to modify this? No, that's right. I still got the addition of not moving enough and eating too much usually lead to obesity or overweight. With science, we've learned that it's not really the weight on the scale that's important. It's a bit more about where you get that weight, where it settles on your body. The fat that settles on the waist and on the abdominal section is the one that's most dangerous for the health of your heart. So that's why usually we take a bit more look at your waist circumference than at the weight on the scale. Because all in all, weight is definitely secondary to the two previous behavior. It's better to be overweight and active and healthy eating than the opposite, being of a normal weight and not moving at all and just being unhealthy on your eating habits. All right, so remember, weight is secondary to the two previous behavior, but it's still kind of a tell about the balance between how you eat and how you move in general. All right, so what we can do to fix that? Well, of course, we can once again increase our physical activity practice. It's going to help to keep the energy balance on the better side of things. Limiting sitting time is another way to spend a bit more energy. And of course, well, the solution to unhealthy eating is, of course, healthy eating. All right, but it's to adopt healthy eating habits, not necessarily dieting, but adopting healthy habits that you're going to be able to sustain forever. That's the goal, indeed. The next risk factor is one that you've probably all heard about, another behavioral factor, which is smoking tobacco. Actually, not just smoking, whether it's vaping, chewing, there's not really a safe way to consume tobacco at the moment, all right? And nicotine is a hell of a drug for addiction. So we know that it's not necessarily easy to stop smoking. It's one of the hardest things to do in changing behavior. However, there are some solutions, all right? Science has proved over and over that using pharmacologic help, so using some medication to help yourself stop, gives you better chances of succeeding in your smoking cessation. So obtaining help from medication can be a nice trigger, a nice push in the right direction. There's also some science that tells us that increasing your physical activity level while you stop smoking is a good way to improve your chances of success also, because you're kind of replacing a bad habit with a good one. So you're not just taking away the bad habit and letting a void behind it, but you're replacing with something good. And usually when you start moving, you kind of realize a bit more how tobacco has been limiting your breathing also. So first thing is finding support. If you're looking to stop smoking, we can help you with that, but talking about it is usually the first step about making an action plan about how to stop. And we know it's hard to go just cold turkey, so there are better strategies to stop smoking with a bit of help, and we can discuss this a bit with you. Next one, those three here are a bit more what your doctor is looking for in your blood tests in general. So we call them a bit more like biological factors. So we got cholesterol, diabetes, and hypertension. So cholesterol is usually an imbalance in fat and the transporter or the carriers of fat in your body. We hear often about bad and good cholesterol. You see on the picture here, the bad cholesterol is the LDL. It's the molecule that carries the fat from your liver to the arteries, where it can accumulate into some plaque. So those are the bad ones. We try to keep them low in general. while the HDL are a bit more like the artery cleaner or the janitor. They take the fat from the plaque and take it to get it recycled to the liver. So those are usually one that we try to get up. And for the cleaners, there's not any medication that's been proven efficient to increase it. However, exercise can increase your HDLs. So that's why exercise is pretty good on cholesterol level. For diabetes, well, having too much sugar in your bloodstream is not good for the health of your arteries. All right, it's a bit like if you had a bit of sand in the bloodstream, it causes somewhat of an erosion on the surface of the artery, and over time it damages the health of the artery. All right, so controlling blood sugar is important. And last but not least, hypertension, so elevated blood pressure. Blood pressure represents the pressure against your heart as to work to put out the cardiac output, the bloodstream. So if your pressure is always high, well, on a regular basis, your heart might be tiring itself out, fighting against that pressure. So that's why we're usually looking for home readings. If you're above 135 over 85, that's usually considered a bit too high. And for diabetic people, we're even more restrictive on blood pressure because the combination of high blood sugar and high blood pressure is a very bad cocktail for the health of your heart and your arteries. All right, so what can we do to control that? You're going to see some solutions that are coming back once again. So, of course, if you have medication for those conditions, do take your medication. Medication don't solve the problem at the source. That's what lifestyle does, but it helps patches up and keeping things in control. But if you rely only on medication to solve your condition, you're not solving the case. You're just waiting for your doctor to give you a bigger dose or more meds because you're not fixing the problem. Next thing, if you want to know if your diabetes or your blood pressure is under control, well, monitoring your blood pressure and blood sugar is the first step to know so. So it's a good habit to at least once in a while take your measure to know if you're under control or not. And the actual behavior that you can do to solve and fix that problem at the source, increasing physical activity practice once again. So physical activity practice gives you better blood sugar control for 2 days after exercise. For blood pressure, you get 1 day of lower pressure after exercising. And over time, cholesterol level can get better with the sustained exercise too. Limiting sitting time is another way to approach fighting sedentary behavior, which tend to increase those factors here. Adopting healthy eating has a lot of impact on those biological factors because the fat and the sugar comes from what you're eating in general. And the last but not least is learning to manage stress. So if you are of a stressful personality or you're living through a lot of anxiety, your body is kind of always in a fighting mode, and it tends to increase your blood sugar and your blood pressure value when you're stressed all the time. Your kind of body is always in fight mode. So learning to be able to calm yourself down can even have an impact on your biological factor. All right. And actually, it's a good thing to learn to manage stress because the last risk factor that we have are more psychosocial factors. So stress and anxiety are quite common nowadays, but they are not good for your heart because they increase blood pressure. They put your body into a state of a fight mode kind of state. So they are risk factors. So learning to manage stress is important. Same thing with mental health in general. There's a lot of science that's coming out between the links between the brain and your heart. The better the circulation from your heart is, usually the better oxygen you get up here. And depression is kind of a vicious cycle with heart disease. Unfortunately, people who suffer from depression are at higher risk of having a heart attack, and people who suffered a heart attack are at higher risk of having depression. It's up to 1 out of 4 people who's going to get depression after having a heart event. So it's something that is common in the clientele participating here. So that's why we try to screen a lot for that. And that's also why we have a psychologist in the program to try to address that. The last factor here is a factor I put it here because it's a psychosocial factor, but it's not really modifiable. All right, a low socioeconomic status. So that can mean either living in poverty or with low education. And people who live in poverty and low education have a lowered access to healthy food and to healthy behavior in general. So there's a fact about the knowledge about healthy behavior and the access to healthy behavior that's a bit tougher when you live in poverty who don't necessarily know what's good for you. So this isn't really modifiable though. Now, what can we do to fix that? We got lifestyle changes to help manage the risk. For psychosocial factor, it's usually the first step is finding support to talk about it. All right, so try to feel free to talk to us about it. We're probably the best person to refer you to the right resources and to get that issue tackled. If you're just waiting for it to solve by itself, most likely it's not going to happen. Knowing the resource in your community can be important to know, do you have access to certain resources in your community that can help solve some of your issue you might be encountering. Taking your medication, if you have any medication for those issues, is important. Physical activity is a very good stress reliever also, and a depression counter if you want to. So it helps on the well-being side of things. If you haven't experienced this so far, usually you feel pretty good after exercise, and over time it's a good way to help lower stress and anxiety levels too. More and more, there's also links between what you eat and how you feel. All right, what you put in your mouth is the fuel for your energy and for your day. So we got to be careful about what we put in there, and getting too much fast food, too much sugar, and etc. is not necessarily good, even on the psychological side of things. And last but not least, but learning to manage stress is the best way to manage stress, of course. All right, so having some techniques and learning really to manage, not just to kind of stuck it in a shelf somewhere and waiting for it to blow up, but to really address it and try to relieve stress as it comes. All right, so if we try to make a little summary of everything we said as solution to those cardiovascular risk factors, it's pretty much the topics we are addressing in the cardiac rehabilitation program. So the first step you can do is take your medication, but as we said, that's not fixing the problem at its source. If you want to really tackle the source of the problem, we're looking for finding support, stop smoking, managing stress, increasing physical activity practice and limiting sitting time, adopting healthy eating habits, reducing alcohol intake, and knowing the resource in your community. All right, so that's pretty much what we try to tackle, and those are the things we try to stress out during the program, because that's what can help you lower your risk. All right, so you might saw a couple of risk factors that are related to your situation, and as you can see, the solution is pretty much always the same. Move more, eat better, try to stop smoking, and manage stress. Take your medication. Those are the kind of the 5 golden rules of cardiac rehab and of managing cardiovascular disease. And know that participating in the cardiovascular rehab program is very useful, because if you get into it and you engage yourself in the program, science tells us that you can lower your mortality from another cardiovascular event by up to 25%. All right, so working on your lifestyle does make life better, all right? And that's not counting the quality of life improvement, but even just for your health in general, that's very, very efficient. All right, so that's what I had to see with you for today about cardiovascular risk factors, and the solution that we can address them with our lifestyle. If you want more info, there's a bit more details and a bit more number on the cheat sheet related to this capsule that you can get on our website. If you have any questions, you can let them come our way, whether by email or asking us in person the next time you show up on site. It will be our pleasure to give you a bit more detail about that. And otherwise, I think that's about it. So I'm going to leave it on that. I wish you guys a very nice week, and I hope you've learned something today. All right, so you guys take care. Bye-bye.